for the people who haven't learned a lot about design thinking and service design, I hope this gets you up to speed. Feel free to put questions in the chat, and you can always, like some other organizer, feel free to yell and stop me as I'm going. So without further ado, disclaimer, all models are wrong, but some are useful, right? So some of the models I'll be showing you, like, they're not canon. If you put a dozen designers in a room and ask them what design is, you'll get over 100 answers, right? So, you know, there's lots of different ways to do things. This is just the way that I have found is really effective for me in my career. So what is design thinking? Design thinking is basically, it's kind of two things. It's a process and it's a mindset in which we seek to understand users, challenge assumptions, redefine problems, all with the goal of identifying new solutions that might be immediately apparent. This is different than, you know, the scientific method or engineering, where there's, like, you know, one specific answer you're trying to get to. Like, if you're trying to figure out what color should this car be, there isn't a right answer. So design thinking is valuable because it pushes us to consider bigger pictures while focusing on addressing human needs and experiences. And it's different than just, you know, solving for business or tech requirements. Design thinking helps us generate solutions that are innovative, not just incremental. And the iterative process of design thinking allows us to take small bets and reduces the risk associated with launching a new idea, a new product, or a service. So that's kind of roughly design thinking. The what, this is like the process, like what are designers doing? This is what I call the reflecting bridge model. And as you can see kind of in the upper left corner, it starts with like a trigger, right? So you see a problem in the world, or you experience a hardship or a pain, and you're like, hey, we should do something about this, right? You're feeling empowered. And so you start by, and I wish I could point, but, you know, I don't have a mouse cursor here, but you start with exploring problems in the real world. And as you can see, it goes small to large. So in this quadrant, you're using what we call divergent thinking, right? You're trying to take in as much information as possible. And then, actually, I think I have a, there we go. This one has a little bit more details. So if people want to be reading along with me, they can. Then in the second quadrant, upper right, you're understanding the same problems, but in the abstract. You're kind of trying to synthesize what you found and really get at the core of what's bothering people. This also, like, leads to your insight generation and allows you, and inspires your solutions. Speaking of, so in the bottom right corner, now you're imagining solutions in the abstract. And again, we're going broad here. You're coming up with as many ideas as possible. This is where you might hear about things like yes and, or there's no wrong answers, right? You kind of want to go a little wacky and crazy because you never know where the right idea might come from. And then in the last quadrant in the bottom left, you're building these solutions in the real world. And this is where you're kind of testing and refining, kind of polishing ideas. You might run a pilot and you're trying to get it to the point where it's ready to be launched into the world. And then at some point it's implemented, and then your idea, your service, your product becomes the new normal from which you can then start the journey all over again. If anyone's curious about this model, there's a little link in the bottom right, and you can always just go to yosefshuman.com and read a lot about it. All right, moving on. So that's the what, right? That's what designers do. And this is kind of the how. This is kind of the mindset. These are, again, just over the years, and I've grabbed these from, I didn't create these, but I kind of grouped them together from lots of different design principles that I'd seen over the years. But I felt like these 11 kind of spoke truth to me, right? To do good, to do ethical design, which is a big conversation topic these days. So number one, and definitely it is number one, although the others aren't, you know, ranked so much, but, you know, put persons first, right? So if you're not improving quality of life, if you're not bringing more happiness to the world, it's probably not a good design. Seek diversity. Of course, you want to make sure that you're hearing voices from, you know, across the table. You want to make sure that you're hearing from, you know, the minority groups who, you know, you don't want to overlook them. I think I heard, you know, Facebook has billions of users. So if you overlook 1% of your users, that's millions of people who might be overlooked. Collaborate continuously, right? You want to, you know, this is kind of, sometimes people call it design with a little d. You want to make sure that, you know, when possible, you're letting people sit at the table who are going to be affected. So the decisions aren't just being made at them, but by them. Keep an open mind, of course. You want to, try to let go of your biases, and you want to make sure that you can learn new things. Go deep and broad, right? While you're focusing on your problem, you also want to be understanding the context. You want to be understanding the other forces at play in the world that might be affecting your problem space, and be considering those. Planning for the future, of course. You don't want to create something that's just going to be effective for only 2 months because something else is coming out. So look at trends, look at the world, and try to make sure that your product is going to be relevant in the future. Do more, talk less. Wow, I could take a hint from that right now. No, but the idea being that, oh, should we admit this person? Hopefully, someone let Samantha. The idea is you can be all thought, no action, right? But really, until you put something out in the world, you don't know how it's gonna live, and how it's gonna be reacted to. So as soon as you can, this is almost like talking about prototyping, which we'll get into at the end of tomorrow. You want to put prototypes out as soon as possible and learn from those. Pursue truth, just a general thing. Iterating forward, of course. This one kind of almost goes with the next one. Like, you're going to have failures. Treat failure as a way to learn, not as a setback. And stay optimistic, because progress is always possible. And then the last one is a little bit scary, a little sad, but fear your power, right? If you're a designer, you're creating things, and those things will have impacts on other people's lives. So, try not to be have fun, but make sure that you're not being, too whimsical about it to the point where you might negatively impact someone, just because, you create a website and you're like, oh, this is pretty, or it's cute, but it like ends up not being usable for people, and that could like lead them to have worse lives. So those are kind of like the principles. That's the how we do design. And this is my joke slide, because there's so much more to talk about. All right, so that's basically design thinking. Do we want to pause there for a second? I can't even see the chat. Is there any questions so far, fellow organizers?
Nope, you're good. Someone just Mel posted a blog post with your 11 design principles.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I put a lot of stuff up there. Most of the stuff in my presentations there's a blog post somewhere about it. So this is idea, you're designing products, you're designing digital products or physical products, but this is an old quote, and you've probably all seen it before, but people don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole, right? And on top of that, if someone's going to come into your house and drill a hole, I think you'd rather it be these guys on the left and not this guy on the right? So it's we're going kind of like this idea from a product to a service to an experience. And this is what Joseph Pine and James Gilmore talk about in their book, The Experience Economy. So it's kind of like a defense of like why service design is starting to emerge so much in the last few decades, right? So looking back at human economies, thousands of years ago, we were just extracting commodities and selling those. Later, not too much later, but then people were making goods, right? You could take these beans, you could roast them in a certain way, or you could flavor them in a certain way and package them in a certain way, and suddenly it's more valuable, it's more differentiated. Then you can have services, right? Maybe you don't even need to buy coffee at your office. Maybe they just have a vendor who supplies the coffee and just keeps the machine stocked, right? It's like moving past the good. And then finally, you're staging experiences, so you're getting a lot of other things when you go into a Starbucks. There's Wi-Fi, there's nice music, there's seating, there's all these, programs for loyalty and all this kind of stuff. And then of course, we have Disney here, which at this point, I don't even know what services or goods or commodities they're even bringing to the table anymore, because it's so much living in this space of experience, right? They're just trying to bring joy to people's lives. And the services and the goods are almost interchangeable as long as they're supporting that goal. So, for a lot of companies, just like I mentioned, Starbucks, and for Disney, right? But, their service, the experiences that they're providing to people is basically their value proposition. Like, you look at any of these, like, why do people prefer Uber over old New York City yellow taxis, right? It's because they have a better experience, a better service, even though they are ultimately getting you from like your house to the restaurant or whatever. So you can imagine, like, the economy is competing now in the space of experience. There are services across a wide range of fields, right? From small to big. And here you have the service goods continuum. And so, some services, I actually think haircuts are really funny because it's one of the services where you actually lose a product. You're giving them your hair, right? You're saying, please take it away. Whereas in others, there is no, so that would, in that case, it's like a negative good almost, but that's the joke. You have like tutoring, what are you getting? You're getting nothing tangible out of that. You're getting education, right? You're getting smarter, you're getting better grades. But when you're buying a car, for instance, in the bottom left here, like there are lots of services associated with a car buying experience, but at the end of the day, it's mostly around the product, right? It's mostly around the vehicle. Similarly, and this is an old stat, I should look up what the new one is. They're on Wikipedia, but yeah, this was 10 years ago, and you can see like such a huge part of countries' economies are based in what they call the tertiary or the service sector. So this is why service design has really like come into its own in the last few decades. So what is service design? Well, here's some technical answers. Service design is basically the application and extension of design thinking towards the analysis, design, and implementation of services. This includes conceptualizing, defining, planning, and orchestrating the end-to-end service experience, and often requires examining the internal operations, cultures, and structures of an organization to understand how these forces impact the service experiences provided. So that's a lot. I'll leave it up there for a second. But a simpler one that I really like is that service design is about understanding and providing the best experiential path to reach a desired outcome, right? So again, we can go back to the haircut. If you go in and you have to wait for a long time and the place smells bad and the stylist is rude to you and maybe the chair's uncomfortable, but like you go home and you look in the mirror and you're like, this is the best damn haircut I've ever gotten, right? Like, is that a good service or not? Right? So, but similarly, you could have a great experience and go home and look in the mirror and be like, I don't really like how I look. So you kind of need to be balancing these two. Like, what's the path to the desired outcome? Here's just some examples, very quickly, like, again, like this is the goal is, someone's at home and they want to watch a movie and there's all these different paths that they could take. Everything from Blockbuster to old Netflix here to, Disney Plus to Redbox, all these sorts of things, Apple TV. So they're all basically providing the same service, but doing it in a different way that makes it valuable. Some practical definitions, of course, UX is huge compared to service design. And I love UXers, especially, if you go back and you listen or like read books or listen to like talks from thought leaders of UX like 20 years ago, they're basically indistinguishable from service design. I understand that. But practically, when you go into a business or an organization, when they talk about UX, they're talking about the experience between a person and a single touch point, usually a digital product. Whereas with service, I kind of feel like we got like running and then we like leapt off the shoulders of UX. Like they went as far as they could go before they got dragged back and we just jumped off and got a little bit further. So service design can now orchestrate the experiences among all parts of the service, from people to objects to places and interfaces. Just quick example, of ways to think about a service. So this is, an Apple store. And we have touch points, journeys, ecosystems, DNA from small to large. So touch points would be anything from like this glass facade and their big logo, the signage, the handle and how that feels, all the different products that are in here. And then one of the most important touch points that people overlook a lot is this person. They're going to greet you. Apple used analogous research and they asked their employees, like, where are some of the best experiences? And a lot of people said high-end hotels. So they went and spoke to Ritz-Carlton and learned from them this idea of the 10 steps, 10 seconds. And so they adopted this, which means if you go into an Apple store, at least historically, and you go in within 10 steps or 10 seconds, someone will greet you and ask you if you need anything, and that's like really changes the experience of entering the store. So those are all touch points. Then there's different journeys that can happen here, right? This person comes in, they get checked in. Do you need anything? Nah, I just want to look at this new device. Boom. Someone else comes in, they're like, yeah, I actually have a Genius Bar appointment. They go all the way back and, they get served. So there's different journeys that can happen within a space. Then we have the ecosystem, right? So this is just like the Genius Bar. There's so many different journeys you can go on, just, from checking online and making your appointment and then coming in, and maybe you just want to learn something about a new piece of software, or maybe you have a broken device or whatever it is. There's all these, that's like an ecosystem within Apple. And finally, you have, the DNA, like what is Apple's brand? What are their values, and how do those permeate throughout all these experiences? And then, of course, big or small, the right change can have huge impacts. It's not quite service design, but in the bottom right here, you have the organ donation. Some countries have the default be that you opt in, and others where you opt out. And the difference is staggering, how many people are participating in these programs. I love this one in the upper left. Dutch police cars have teddy bears. So if, a child's in a car accident or something scary happens, they have this ready to give to the kid. It can totally make or break this child and their family's experience. And then this one, it's a little hard to read, so we can do this. Underneath the hotels, there's a little card, a little A-frame. It costs almost nothing, but it says, yes, we clean under here too. And right, that little piece of joy provides, both their branding voice a little bit, but also, brings comfort to someone sleeping there. Oh, they're taking care of things. It improves the quality of their service experience. Before we go too crazy here, any questions yet in the chat, organizers?
No, we're just really just trading what books to read. We're enjoying what you're saying, so you can keep
Okay.
going.
All right. Well, we're coming into the finish line. So these are the 8 Ps of service design that I've kind of developed over the years. I started with 5, then 7, then 8. You can imagine pretty quickly what these kind of mean. And I think of these as like the knobs, the levers, the dials that you can kind of tweak and pull and change in order to change the experience or to curate the experience that you want, right? So the people could be, the people that a customer interacts with. It can also be the other people in the space. In this case, it's a restaurant. The place could be the lighting, how it sounds, how it looks, all this sort of stuff, where it's located. Props could be anything from tablecloths to silverware to menus to, anything that you're going to touch or look at. Some things are a little bit, this isn't like strict, like a chair or a table, you could say is both a place and a prop. Don't get too hung up on it. The process is part of the experience. Do you pay when you first enter? Do you pay after you eat? Does the hostess greet you and seat you before anything? Like you can think about how you can tweak the process. Partnerships or partners, if you don't have a point of sale system, if you're cash only, that's going to affect your customer's experience. If they can pay at the table or pay using Venmo, right? All these sorts of things affect, but you need to have those partnerships on the back end to support that. Price comes kind of more from marketing, but it does set expectations. If someone pays a lot for a service, they're expecting a lot. They're expecting something that's high touch and luxury possibly. Whereas if you don't pay much, you're like, you're happy even if the service is kind of quick. Positioning kind of has to do with the philosophy of the brand, like does your restaurant only sell organic or local food, right? That's part of like who you are and what you value, and it has an effect on the experience of your customers. And finally is policies. When I worked in government, I was constantly bumping up against different policies or laws that already existed, and saying, you have to design within these constraints, but you can also say, hey, can we prototype policy? What happens if we allow people to do this or do that? And how can that change people's experiences? So that's kind of the 8 Ps of service design. And as a service designer, this is kind of what it feels like. You're sitting here, you're kind of orchestrating all of these things, and what comes out of that, the gestalt almost, the synthesis of that, if you're into like systems thinking, is the service experience. And it will be unique for every customer, but you're trying to control that as much as possible to make it positive. So those are your 8 Ps. And then you also kind of have the 5 Es, which has to do with bringing time into this equation, right? So, these are just little mnemonic devices that make it, helpful or easy to remember. So, first someone's enticed, they hear about you, they enter, how they begin the engagement basically, and then they have the engagement, and then they exit, they end the engagement, and then you can try to extend, build that relationship, bring them back in. Or like, how does that relationship evolve over time? So you have these 5 over time, and then you have the 8 Ps, and this is just like a little canvas that can be useful to be thinking about your service and how you want people to experience it over time. And then what things are you doing in order to again, those knobs and levers to help make that experience feel a certain way. This is available. You guys can use it tomorrow. But I just think like it's a really good mental model as well, even if you're not going to use it like actually, but just kind of thinking about your service in terms of these can be really useful. And finally, I think this is my last slide. Just realizing that another thing that's interesting about services is that you kind of have these swim lanes. So you have, your customers, and they interact with various touch points, everything from the door handle to the greeters to, the waiters, whatever it is. But then you have this line of visibility. There's things happening on the back end. You've got maybe your cooks and your chefs, and then you have your technology and like the people that you order your food from. And right, so all these things kind of have to happen in concert in order to make the service work. In order to deliver the service to the customers, you need to be considering all of these things. We're not going to get into journeys or service blueprints today. We'll be getting into those tomorrow, but it's just like another thing to be thinking about when you're learning about service design. So yeah, we will have links and we will have resources. But now I will open up the floor. If anyone has questions, comments, you can yes and anything I said.
That's great, Yosef. We've actually been talking in the chat about what our favorite experiences are. I started off Trader Joe's. I'm ashamed, I'm in there way too much. They know me by first name. Is my favorite experience. Mo loves Jenny's ice cream. Woman owned, yay. So Yosef, what's one of the most common questions you're asked after a talk?
What's one of the most common questions I'm asked?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I kind of tried to get the jump on that, right? So one of the most common questions I get asked is, oh, so you design websites? Or I'll get asked, oh, so you do customer service, right? And those are, of course, I have, great answers to all of this. I also have people who are more like maybe engineering minded. They're like, oh, so it's all about making things more efficient. And, I kind of have answers to all of those. I say, no one goes to Disney for an efficient experience, right? Like that's not your goal, is efficiency. Yes, if you have to wait in line for 4 hours to get on Space Mountain, you're going to have a bad experience. But ultimately, like you want to go for a memorable experience. You're trying to spend as much time at Disney as possible. No one goes to the beach for efficiency, So that's the efficiency argument. Digital, obviously, I can give a million examples about, yeah, you can order your ticket online, but then you have to actually go to the airport. You actually have to go through security. You wait at the gate. Like you're not digitally on the airplane. There are digital and non-digital touch points. And sadly, most of the attention is given to digital these days, but there are the lived experiences that, you don't want like all the digital things to be really highly designed and all the in-person parts to be like really undesigned, because that doesn't create like a good experience.
Right.
And then when it comes to customer service, I'll say something like, well, no one at Blockbuster was probably rude to you, but that doesn't mean that they're going to beat Netflix, right? Netflix was providing a service that was just more preferable to people. And it had nothing to do with how nice the staff was.
Cool.
Yeah.
We actually had a question in the chat of whether the slides would be available.
Yeah. So
okay.
Not only are all these slides, yeah, I can make them available, but almost everything that I've talked about today is on my website. I've written a blog post at some point over the last 6 years that goes into even more depth on any of these topics. But yeah, happy to make the slide deck available. I haven't.
It's a non-shameless plug.
Yeah, but we can probably. Yeah, well, it's more like if you want to know more, like I tried to do a lightning talk. Feel free to go, go to town, lose some sleep.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions?
Come back and yell at me. I don't know. Tell me I'm wrong. Help me learn.
Gwinnett says, I believe that good or great is highly subjective, making it very important to know the audience you're designing for. That's very true. And Jen said, the earlier description of service versus UX, I disagree. And so would a lot of other UXers. Hey, Jen, you want to come on and talk about that?
I know you would disagree, because I would disagree.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of time.
But, so we have different years in the space. And from your perspective and what you've studied and what you've done, I can see why that's your position. But with a quarter of a century doing this work and seeing a lot of different things come and go, and talking with a lot of the people that you would refer to as the bigwigs in UX, some UXers do take a service design, as you call it, approach, and do think about the holistic vision.
Yes.
And the holistic experience design.
Yes.
I prefer to think of things more as an experience design, because what's the good of designing one touch point if you don't think about how that one touch point plays into the entirety of the user experience, or the
Right.
or the brand experience, or all of these things. Too many people focus on the spacing and the brand style, and I'm just so over it. It's Friday night, and I'm out of spoons of patience with a lot of things, and it's like, come on, people, who are we doing this all for? We're doing this for the people we serve. Are we doing it for just the people with the money and just the people with the fancy phones? No, we're doing it for all the people. And there's no such thing as an edge case. There's no such thing as power user, design for all the people. I could go on,
Yeah. I mean, this is the same thing. They say the only industries where they call their customers users are design and drugs, so
yeah.
We have good company. No, but I totally agree. Like, I think, as I said, UX didn't mean to be constrained to digital, and many people in UX don't see themselves as constrained to digital. But if you do look at UX jobs, for instance, most of them are going to expect that you can do wireframing, so that's why I put it in practical. Like, it's great, even my sister's into UX now, and she does UX research, and she is able to think broader. So I basically could call her, a service designer. But at the end of the day, the solution has already been decided to be a digital product. So in that way, it's like, as broad as you want to think about it, you're always kind of pushed into that because of her bosses.
Not in all cases.
I agree, which is why, the
I'm gonna
more that UX can push back, the better, because I love the term experience design.
I'm gonna agree with you, Yosef, because just in recent years, with the UX being stuck in digital and service design being expanded more, the shift is that, like, as you were saying, people who are asking for UX designers, even though we are supposed to have touch points across different services, are only looking for the digital experiences. Now people are finally starting to recognize service design when they're looking more for the holistic approach.
Yeah.
But UX as a term, as a job category, or in that sense, is still stuck in the digital.
Yeah.
And if we want to go back, if we want to expand, then we have to rebuild, rename, reframe ourselves for those who want to, because some people in UX are happy to stay in the digital, and some people want to expand beyond digital and go into service design. So I think it's extremely, the point that you're making is valid.
Yeah. And if to put even more weight behind what Jen is saying, for a lot of companies, if they are, not leading edge or bleeding edge, but they're kind of late adoption, on that curve, they might start with UX and then from there expand into service, right? So like UX digital design might be their foot in the door towards doing design for more aspects of their customer journeys or their customers' experiences. So yeah, it's not that UX, in some places, UX isn't a dead end, it becomes a springboard into doing more.
Yeah, but I think it depends on what you have as a background. I think, given that I've got a lot of experience across a lot of different industries, I don't agree. I don't agree with Glennette's point either. Maybe those are the people that you've experienced where your UXers are focused on digital, but in my experience, in my experience with UXers. Yeah, I've met some that do that, but I've also met a lot of others that don't, and that do spread across the entirety of the person's journey. And we focus a lot more attention on exploring the problem space and really trying to understand what people's purpose is and what they want to do before we get into the solution. Very often we fill these designer jobs with someone that we say, you're going to be building this product and you're going to be building this service. And that's where I think you guys are talking about. But that's not the broader world. I don't know, like I've worked all over the country and with a whole lot of different companies, and this doesn't match my experience at all.
Okay. Well,
Jen, this is a good segue, and I'll say why. Asher has asked, for Yosef, would you be able to talk about how you got into service design? And Jen, you said that you've had so much experience. For some people on this here tonight, this is their first experience, or they might just have an interest in service design. So let's just go to Asher's question. What would you be able to say how you got into service design? Or what's a path that somebody can take to get into service design?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't want to get stuck on this for too long because I know we want to let people socialize. But yeah, my path, I never did digital design. Like, you know, I'm not great at InDesign. I didn't learn Figma or Axure or Balsamic or any of these things. I can't code, I can't make a website. And my visual skills are like through the bottom of the ground. Like I focus on the empathy and the understanding. I went to school for service design and I learned how to understand needs and develop new services. And some of those had digital touch points, but to me, digital and technology is always just a tool to facilitate the end experience that we're trying to get.
Awesome.
Yes,
And we have
giving yourself enough credit. You helped us make these virtual backgrounds.
That's true.
I know how to click a few buttons in Illustrator. I know how to vectorize an image to save my ass.
The reason I came to service design when I moved to DC, when I came to the service design jam, was I was intrigued by what sounded like very human-centered people. And that first service design jam I went to, it was in person, it was down in the Navy Yard, and it was all of that. People they care so much about the people. And that's why I come back to service design every year, for that fresh dose of people who care about human-centered design. Whereas the rest of the year, if I go to AIGA, it's all about the visuals and the branding and the snazz, even though people want to talk about the other thing. And if I go to something else, it's all about just this. And people forget why we do this. We don't do this for our portfolio and our resume and our bank account. I mean, we do, you gotta do it. This is the world. But we do it because we wanna have impact on people, right?
Absolutely.
And that's why I back to service jam.
And whoever has Jen as their coach, you guys are lucky. Glennette's the coach. So we are gonna keep on moving. We are right on time for networking.